All right, we're just waiting for a few more people to file in, and we can get started.
Okay. I remain silent until addressed.
And as people make their way into the event, just wanted to give a quick introduction that today um, we'll be meeting with John Medina as well as Israel Berger, a fellow of the architecture. I'm sorry, how do you the AIA is
American
uh,
Institute of Architects.
American Institute of Architects. Excellent. So we'll just wait a couple more minutes for people to file into the event, and we can get started.
Excellent.
Daniel,
Yes.
the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, is a professional organization that is very well recognized in the United States and elsewhere, and so and usually the architects that are part of that will nominate someone. That's distinguished in their field. And so it's a real honor for Israel to have received
Would be a fellowship.
a fellow of the AIA. So it's a real feather in his cap. So I just want to
Absolutely.
make a comment that I'm very proud of my friend.
And when was that, Israel? When did you receive the status of fellow?
Some 8 years ago or so, I think.
Amazing.
I don't remember the exact year, but I can tell you that I brought a brand new suit because of it.
I'm sure it's well-deserved opportunity.
I think I own only 3 suits. This was one of them.
That's great. All right, we'll give it one more minute and we'll get started.
I am completely chill. I don't have any issue. In fact, I'm sitting at my window watching a skyscraper being built like 6 blocks south of me, all glass.
Which is very fitting because that's what we'll be talking about today to some extent.
Exactly.
A lot of glass, a lot
Unitized.
of advancements in it, and a lot of experience and history with it.
Oh yeah, unitized curtain wall.
Yes. So we'll go ahead and get started with our third episode of Behind the Curtain Wall. As you may know, we started this series to really unveil a little bit of the experiences and the stories that go behind building envelopes and the curtain wall industry um, with our very seasoned expert John Medina. And so today we're treated with a very special guest, a very good friend of John. His name is Israel Berger. As you heard earlier, he's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about glass and its resilience, and the evolution of glass and its technology over the years. First of all, I'd like to give a quick intro of who Israel is. He's a New York-based architect. He was elected into the College of Fellows not too long ago. And in his career, really dedicated his full career to building facades and sustainability, and has really worked around the globe. So, John, I'd love to hear how you guys met and what that experience was like, and how long ago that was.
Well, I must say that even before going there, I wanted to just sort of describe uh, the sort of evolution for a moment of how glazing consultants kind of came about,
Sure.
and how that sort of brought Israel and I together, and there's some there's some well recognized, or you could almost say heroic or legendary guys in the business that started glazing consulting. um, I'd say probably around the country. They kind of preceded us, and we fell into that group. I'm not sure by accident or on purpose or intentionally, but we made our way amongst a really distinguished number of people that are called glazing consultants. There are many sorts of consultants out there, but our field is very specialized, and the people that set out before us, helped us sort of grow into the people we became. And so I had the good fortune of working with Israel at a construction research laboratory here in Miami, where in the process I think we there was mutual admiration as well as a friendship sort of grew out of it about, I'd say, somewhere about 30 years ago or more, 30 something years ago. And even though we've been in competing firms, we've maintained that friendship and that relationship. Um, and so, which is not, you can't say that of every relationship, but there's been this real sense of camaraderie when it comes to sharing information and discussing the technologies that are associated to glazing. So I think that you know the precise moment when we met, I'm not quite sure if it was at the little car that sells the hot dogs and sodas or what have you, but 30 some years ago, or in a boardroom. But ever since we've stayed connected.
Sure, sure. And Israel, how was your bumping into John? How was that experience like 30 some years ago?
Uh, well, uh, I was caught up in his charm instantly because he's a charming guy. But he was also a competent technician in a test laboratory that any of the listeners, including you, would not have identified as a laboratory. It looked more like a junkyard. It was simple. It was in a barren part of Miami in Hialeah. And the miracle of it was that the knowledge base, the passion, and the competence of the people in it were outsized by any criteria. And much of this credit goes to Saknowski, Sack, who founded it and had the vision that a laboratory is needed to test and, if not certify, at least validate both materials and systems that were engineered and manufactured with a mission of cladding ever growing buildings with mostly glass and aluminum materials. Of course, there were other systems such as steel strongbacks and precast and slab stone and on and on. There were many other kinds, and synthetic materials came later, etc. But the curtain wall was the building block that came on the scene at that time and was the evolution of high rise architecture, the driver of the evolution of high rise architecture ever since. So if you look at the skylines of major new cities, by new I mean 30 years or newer, all over the world, China, India, Russia, Europe, America, all over the world, what do you see? You see glass and aluminum.
Right. And that
So,
obviously that's been a remarkable evolution since 30 plus years ago. I remember a story you were telling us last week, Israel, about you. I think you were um, first. Where was it in? You had been you had heard about a building that some glass panes were falling.
oh, well,
Talk to us about that.
if we want to talk about it, it's a very um, pivotal event in the history of skyscrapers in America, and it is, of course, the John Hancock Building in Boston,
Right.
designed by IMP, uh, a very, very, very tall building in a city that had none. Boston had no skyscrapers, effectively.
And what year was this? You recall?
It's in the 70s.
Okay.
Uh, I cannot point to the exact date when the construction began.
Sure.
The structural engineer was Lemessurier, the architect was IMP, and much of what followed in terms of the art and science of designing skyscrapers was informed by the failures on this building, and there were many, or a few, let's put it that way. Meaning, the way in which the skeleton was conceived, in other words, building such a tall building that has to remain stiff sufficiently to make the experience of the users viable. You don't want to be in a building that sways and twists, etc. So that was one challenge. Then came the challenge of cladding it. And Pei made a decision to clad it with glass only, even though Boston is historically a masonry and stone clad environment with punched windows, as were many other historic cities or historic downtowns. And that was quite daring and audacious. And the building was being built. And oop de doo, with great fanfare, until the first few windstorm came and glass would fly off the building and crush to the plaza below it.
Wow.
I was a student in the School of Architecture at Pratt Institute in New York and heard about it. Little I knew that curtain wall would be part of my professional life. As a young student, listening to what the news reported, I decided I have to see it with my own eyes. I think I had to borrow money to buy a train ticket to get to Boston. I've never been in Boston before. Just
Right,
for the
right.
record, I came to New York from Israel. I'm Israeli by birth, and I was 22 when I arrived here. So, anyway, I traveled to Boston and I saw that vision of this building clad. By then, it was about three quarters finished, I think. I'm talking about a curtain wall. About half of it was plywood and half of it was glass that hadn't fallen yet. Coincidentally, Fast forward almost 20 years, Bill Logan joined my firm, who went to the Harvard School of Architecture at the same time, and he too experienced the glass from the John Hancock falling, and he and I have been giggling about it ever since. And he
Hmm.
he actually photographed it, and I have a photograph of the building, half plywood, half glass. Anyway, all this long story is to point to the fact that we are where we are today with respect to the regulatory issues, the engineering standards, the manufacturing skills. It didn't happen in one day, and it was not obvious. That failure and other buildings' failure, there were others, have guided the industry. By that I mean the professions, architects and engineers, the manufacturers of the base materials, and the contractors who assemble and hoist them to be reverent and informed about the physicality of a skyscraper. What
Sure.
is it? How does it behave? And how it is affected by weather and other elements?
Right. Right.
So,
And
so Daniel, let me add, which is I think it you know,
sure, that's what I was gonna say.
I'm going to connect the dots for a moment. SAC, which is AA Saknowski at CRL Construction Research, they were out of Medley, Florida. Originally, they started that firm was part of the University of Miami at a blimp hangar, and then the SAC bought the laboratory out from They weren't interested in it. Now there's a laboratory similar to that deals with wind and curtain walls at the Florida International University, but SAC had come up with this idea back in the early 50s. I want to say 1955. It might have been a little earlier. So when the John Hancock happens, where the entire panes of glass were popping out of the lights. Before that, there was a lot of the laboratory was used mostly for new product development, and it was really that project that John Hancock, which by the way won an AIA award, okay, for excellence. The project, when you read on it, it won an award for excellence in design, but the glass was popping out. So the laboratory SAC was actually involved in determining, what were the issues, and that laboratory at kind of seminal moments in history was very instrumental in the evolution of glass technology. The glass we know today as impact resistant. Sort of the history, which I know Israel is very familiar with, has kind of led us down the road to where we are now with the glass technologies that were being used. But when I met Israel at the lab, I was an architect at the time, and literally started as actually a technician, worked myself through and became the test engineer of this laboratory. And when Israel would come down, he would usually be representing one of the projects or maybe two of the projects. But the fun of having worked there for a number of years was that as the test engineer, there were 35 full-scale mock-ups. 5 of them were smaller, but the other 30 were full-scale mock-ups that were like 2 stories tall by like 3 bays wide with all kinds of requirements. And my role was to test all of these. And so every month we would generate about 30 tests that were associated to all sorts of things that had to do with air infiltration and water penetration and structural racking, jacking, all sorts of stuff, which Israel and I would do on his projects that for the most part were going all over the place in the world. And and for that time we kind of we would share everything we would learn of not only his projects, but anything I learned from the other projects that would help in his projects, I would share with Israel, and Israel in turn would do the same. So that one project in Boston, across from the Trinity Church, which is this large open space, um, really propelled construction research laboratory and everything we do today.
Yeah.
There are others that there are problems always. There's always been some sort of problems, but that one was this simple idea, which is keep the glass from popping out full
Sure.
frame from the frames of this tall building, which was the exemplar project in Boston at the time.
Yeah.
Not to happen in the future.
Yeah. Uh, I will add a few comments, and we are now really wrapped up in history and less so in current and advanced technologies, and maybe we'll jump into it at some point in this little podcast. But back to the history. First of all, I'm looking fondly at those years where the industry, and by that I mean developers, architects whom they hired, the regulatory elements of it, of building codes, etc., and the industry that provided the solution, meaning curtain walls, aluminum, glass, steel, granite, etc., all had to collaborate. And in hindsight, with all the bumps and the black eyes that followed, in hindsight, it was a remarkable history of success because the industry really pulled it off. Very large buildings were being built. Most of them were very successful. The users of this building, which is the owners and the residents who use it, whether it is commercial, residential, whether you own it or rent it, doesn't matter, benefited from it. Imagine that not have happened and buildings shabbily being built, leaving the users to their own devices. The warranty is 3 years. What do you do after that? We have to put it in perspective. And how do you want to best illustrate it? Look at China. They, from what I know, I've I've been there, I've seen some of it, but I don't have specific knowledge of evidentiary knowledge of what is going on. But they have built awful, awful buildings, and they're suffering for it. They're awful.
Mm.
Because the way they did it is different from how it was done here in the US, and maybe our system of checks and balances and lawyers lurking behind every corner and uh, building departments personnel who enforce what they perceive to be the building code that's local to that city or that state. All of that was orchestrated in hindsight by history, not by man or woman, by history, to be a success. And I think it has to be recognized as such.
Right.
And the American success in developing standards and techniques and technologies was adopted by other countries, including Europe. So let me talk for a moment about Europe. Uh, as my company got established and had a reasonably good reputation, I was solicited to open a branch in London when Canary Wharf was being built. For those who don't know, the area of Canary Wharf in London, which now looks like a giant forest of skyscrapers, was flat. There was nothing there. It is just east of London, the historic London, where the Thames make a very large bend, which is where the historic maritime production of England began in Middle Ages and flourished in the 16th and 17th century to make England the maritime empire they became. The ships were built there, and they colonized half the world because of it. All of that came to an end. In World War II, the Germans helped them to bring it to an end because they bombed the crap out of it. So after the war, there was very much to not very much to salvage, and they basically demolished most of the industrial buildings there. And open land was ready to be developed when the Reichman brothers from Canada developed Canary Wharf. So when we got there, there were 7 buildings under construction simultaneously with very renowned architects: Caesar Pelli, KPF, some German architect, Italian architect, and on and on. Uh, the first few buildings, 7 in number, were built simultaneously, and the feature building, the very tallest at the time, was Caesar Pelli's. Tower One was the name, and so the curtain walls for all these buildings came from all over the world, some U.S. and some Europe, and I, the curtain wall consultant who were to sign off on all of that and inspect it, traveled to all these factories: Belgium, France, Germany, Greece, I don't remember where else, England. There was one company in England. And I have seen with my own eyes very antiquated factories that needed to gear up to produce modern styled, efficient curtain wall units to be shipped by container and erected on site. And some of these companies, Perma Stilisa, the Italian one included, which until then manufactured windows for residential buildings, that's it. They probably didn't know how to spell curtain wall, became one of the biggest curtain wall companies on earth with branches in Australia, Europe, US, and on and on. So, for those listeners who look at curtain walls now, I think I'm not exaggerating by telling you that all of this did not arrive from Amazon. it, it was accomplished one step at a time, and indeed one failure at a time. There were all kind of failures. Slabbing stone into very thin plates had its challenges. Using precast for
Israel,
cladding in high rise had its challenges, etc.
Israel, let me just add something. So one of the things so in the sort of evolution of what Israel is talking about, I'll bring up that back in the day, back in those early years of where Israel is talking that he was very fond of, one of the common denominators of sort of an American made product at this testing laboratory. By the way, there were two other ones that were sort of not at the same level, but there was one in Houston and another one, ATI in York. They kind of started at the same time, but it was really SAC's genius as to making the machinery that goes into a lot of the testing. In fact, it's the same kind of testing that's done today, and SAC was very involved with that. But the what's interesting of that time was that how there was this collegiality amongst everyone in product development. Um, as the evolution went, and I agree, there was municipalities that were tied into these things, and codes that would accept throughout the country, that would accept the findings of laboratory testing. But there was genuinely an academic, esoteric kind of level of understanding that each building was a kind of a new and improved version of what was in the past, right? And it was really a beautiful thing to see. Whereas when in '92, when Hurricane Andrew kind of devastated Miami, that there was this standardization criteria that came into play through the Florida Building Code. Suddenly, the kind of the sort of developmental new product lines that were being studied for all potential possibilities got sort of lumped into the criteria of following certain standardized testing, which is TAS 201, 202, 203, and a lot of what was pretty much an open book as to how people would learn from each other got reduced down to a level of now almost, I would tell you, secrecy, because sharing is not oftentimes what the current kind of market of builders of glazing systems want to do. And so, I think even more now than before, the experience has somewhat similar because the testing is the same, but the final product is more often associated to just complying with the minimum requirements of the Florida Building Code or certain codes. Whereas I think that in the past, one of the things that was very really interesting was how people came together to create new kind of concepts together, and
Right.
I think we've lost some of that. And in regards to Permis to Lisa, I had the flagship project that Permis to Lisa did in the United States was Espiritu Santo Bank, which is now the Brickell Brickell Arch, and I was able to, I was responsible for their first project in the States that opened up the market here, which was a pressure equalized rain screen barrier assembly, which is still today, and by the way, it's insulated as well. Still today, the premier glazing system that was installed in South Florida, and was able to see it through not only when it was completed, but after a hurricane that was pretty hard on it. And
John, do you think that the openness and communication back then between different testing labs, compared to how things are now, helped to really push forward innovation and technology? And do you think that how do you see the playing field now? Do you think things have slowed down because everyone is in their own silo because of that?
I think that it's because a lot of the companies that are doing, especially work in Florida. Florida is really active right now with building tall buildings. It's kind of the mecca of buildings. I think, from what I can tell across the country. One of the things that's happened is that the Florida Building Code requires each glazing assembly to have a notice of acceptance, and that notice of acceptance is public. So everybody has to put their product out there for consumption in the
Right.
internet, in the cloud. No, and so there's a concern. There's a concern of people um, maybe it's kind of like AI copying the design of successful systems that has cost a lot of money um,
Right.
from new kids that are coming onto the block. We're getting a lot of interest by like countries like China, like Israel was saying, China and Turkey and the European countries that want to open up a market, open up in Florida, and they quite don't know the what it's like to work here. But there's a lot of not only knowing the technology, but knowing the standards that are in place to try to maintain that American, made in American feel. But materials are coming in from South America, from all parts of the world, and it's not quite the same as those early years, like Israel was saying, the early years of high-rise construction. That was American made. Now countries around the world are kind of owning this idea that because it's been done, they're doing it in Europe or in China or in these sort of Middle Eastern countries, that somehow they got the handle. It's not only to install all of this stuff and build it, but it's also durability and maintenance. If you don't
Right.
have the ability to repair, to correct some of these things when a light of glass breaks or a frame gets damaged, you're talking about being 700 or 800 feet up in the air sometimes on a swing stage trying to correct things, which is you know um,
Uh,
tough.
I'd like to add, I would like to uh, change the trajectory of this discussion just a little bit for the benefit of the listeners. My iPhone tells me that there are 11 listeners, and I quite frankly don't know who they are and what their profile is, but whoever they are, I would say this: the act of building a skyscraper is complicated. It is really a miracle. It is a miracle that it works as efficiently as it does, considering all that could go wrong with it. If you think about it, it's really an incredible endeavor. Going forward and looking forward, anyone who is engaged by whatever capacity, architect, mechanical engineer, structural engineer, curtain wall consultant, uh, and etc. There are many subspecialties, acoustics, and on, would do a disservice to their customers and to disservice to society if they will take shortcuts in understanding the historical context of building that building in that location in that period of time. Because all the choices that need to be made, and there are endless choices, some are architectural, some are regulatory driven, some are budget driven, some have to respond to an owner or a client who is not always necessarily rational and able to process complicated matters, but he's still your client and you have to respond to it, okay? So, all that we can talk about regarding the past, in my mind, is in the service of making better professionals for the future. This is not just kumbaya about how it was. This is this little symposium we are engaged in this morning. No, it's not only afternoon. I'm sorry. It's morning in California. Uh, should serve as a uh, tweaking and improving the mindset of all of us who are engaged in construction. Those old guys like me who have done, I cannot even count how many hundreds of millions of square feet of construction, and those who are younger and will do hundreds of millions of square feet of construction, all have, I think, I advocate, all have to uh, keep their eyes on the target in terms of producing and performing as they do the work, but also keep the eye on the historical and social context, because sometimes architects and builders are either pushed or choose to take shortcuts, to not study it to the degree, to not study elements of this endeavor to the degree that it needs to be studied. And mistakes are very, very tragic and costly. And there are many of them, unfortunately. And I don't want to turn this conversation into a forensic story of what could go wrong and has gone wrong and is going wrong. We can do another podcast just on that. But this is very consequential. It's very important. And I'm focusing on facades. There are other parts of, other elements of high rise building that are equally important. It's the structure, the elevator, the life support, the plumbing, the HVAC, energy use, and on and on. But with regards to the facade, it's always going to be there protecting the people on the inside, and always has to be safe so that nothing falls and kills people on the outside, has to be serviceable and durable, and has to be energy efficient. We have to know that the climate is changing, not for the better, and our children and grandchildren are at peril of living with the consequences of it. And therefore, taking shortcuts in building skins that are inefficient will have a terribly deleterious effect on future generations. And
Right.
complying with building codes is the lowest grade of compliance. We should try to comply to higher callings than that, just the code. It's hard to convince developers and bankers to spend a penny more than they must, but we need to not build buildings that are not durable.
Right. Right. No, that's
That's where you
and
have to put your foot down and just advocate durability and energy efficiency. That's the mission of young professionals in this field: architects, engineers, project managers, development executives. Must.
right. You want buildings that can truly stand the test of time, and where maintenance doesn't become an issue, but it's something that you're prepared for that. That's a great point to kind of segue into um, a conversation that I'd like to have both of you discuss, in terms of what if you could pick a building or a project that you would have the opportunity to have done differently in terms of the building envelope or the glazing, and what building would that be, and how would you have approached it differently?
It's not that simple to answer. It was simple to ask, but not simple to answer.
Sure.
Uh, the The process of building a high-rise building is very complicated. And so the answer to your challenge is in the details, in the day-to-day conversations that steer the team to a credible outcome. It has to do with anchorage. It has to do with gaskets and caulking and mullions and glass products. Sometimes the project is driven by very erudite, experienced architects who understand what they need to understand in order to qualify to build a very tall building and complicated building, and sometimes not. Sometimes architects are like flying the off the walker and just try to do things that appear very enticing and very creative and very groundbreaking, but very undoable and very dangerous in the big scheme of things. And we need to be the grown-ups in the room and um, make sure that the buildings end up at the end up to be credible. And it may mean that we'll be kicked off the job.
Right.
So I would getting a little more maybe possibly granular, in regards to what Israel is talking about in regards to the younger generation of folks that are going to build future high rises. Um, I think that the ability to know thoroughly the the performance that's anticipated or expected of a glazing assembly on a tall building is critical to being able to say yes or no to some of the wonky ideas that come up by starter firms that are looking to make a fast buck on a tall building. Um, and it really requires an enormous amount of character to reject some of the ideas that are out there. And in addition to that, know when you have to do a little more work. I think that when you spoke about, can you name me a building? Well, I can name you a cladding that goes between the curtain. When you're not using a curtain wall, you have a window wall. And in South Florida, as opposed to or different than up north, where cladding is usually some kind of a spandrel cover, something that is fairly solid that goes up along the structure that encloses the structure. You have in South Florida the one of the products that's used is stucco, and you know stucco can be used as long as you design it properly for a tall building, recognizing all of the movements that a tall building is going to go through in its service life, and the recognition that you're going to have to, on a yearly basis, deal with all of the what appears to be superficial cracks that eventually can lead to becoming significant cracks in stucco that can allow water to travel through the wrapping of the building, where there is no windows and doors, but there's stucco and block, or stucco and cast in place concrete. And oftentimes, designers aren't consider stucco like the wonder product. Um, but if you go to the early archives of when stucco was discovered around the turn, or when at the time of the Civil War, they had kind of invented stucco, and designers were saying stucco is not necessarily a waterproofing of any kind. It'll leak, and that's on 2-story, 3-story buildings. Now, you see designers using stucco for 60-story, 70-story buildings in South Florida. And what eventually happens is that there will be leaks, and usually the first inkling of a leak is that there's something wrong with a window or a door, but it oftentimes is the concrete block and the stucco and the paint. And after a period of time of interstory movement, from rotation of joints to uh, translation of the walls during high winds, racking, um, stucco won't do well if you don't have it properly detailed and solutions worked out to recognize those type of movements in it. And oftentimes to speak uh, to people that have the control of the purse, they want simple solutions to how to install these products, and
Yeah.
it's not that simple. It's just simple. It's just not that simple.
Yeah. Well, in
Right.
my mind, stucco on a high rise is only good for the people who sell stucco and the developers who pay less than what they should pay. It's not good for everyone else because it has an inert disadvantage of the need to be maintained. And in a high rise building, maintaining stucco is very difficult. Stucco is meant for what it was used for a few thousand years. A building that you walk by, and if you see cracks or you know that it's time to redo it, you redo it. What do you do when it's a 50-story building? How would you know where you need to redo it, etc.? And the stuccos today are not just cement and sand. There are complicated materials with additives and elastomers and accelerators and decelerators, and depending on how it's used and the industrial process that makes them into an efficient, cheap material, without much attention, I think, or at least to my knowledge, of validating its durability. And durability should not be synonymous with warranty. Warranty is a commercial act of 5 years, 10 years. In my mind, durability means 50 years.
Right. And let me ask you both. I mean, both you could probably answer this pretty well. When it comes to material selection and system selection, usually, you know, would an architecture firm have the disciplines and the expertise in order to do the groundwork, or does it make more sense to bring on a consulting firm that has that experience in specifically understanding material selection and systems that would be incorporated based on the longevity of what the building should last?
So
Yes.
the develop the developers out there that are savvy to this line of construction, all right, of significant structures, they usually know that they have to have someone qualified, capable of making difficult decisions, or helping in the development of difficult decisions that oftentimes cost more money. And
I
so
yeah,
let me just finish the thought. So I think that it's like a package deal. The architect ordinarily doesn't have in their fee structure um, a firm uh, a firm like Miami Curtain Wall Consultants. Usually, the developer walks in with, "Look, we're going to give you a hand. Have someone that's looking over your shoulder a little bit and helping evolve and assist the design, so that the difficult, some of these difficult decisions just don't fall on the architect of record." That's been usually my experience on where we're mostly working with developers that, and at the same time supporting the architect in the process. Uh,
Sure.
I agree 100% with what John just said. And furthermore, I would state that it is unfair, maybe even immoral, to expect the architect to carry the burden of this issue, because the act of designing a building from the architectural perspective is complex and complicated enough. When you just think about it, what is expected of architects is mind-boggling. It has to be beautiful, it has to be safe, it has to comply with code, it has to be efficient, it has to be affordable, it has to last, yada 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 yada. To also expect of them to have all the information, all the processes, and the control strategy, get so granular as to know what would be the durability of a stucco panel that came from India. It's unfair to the architect. They're not paid for it, they're not schooled for it. It should not be their burden. It is the responsibility of the developer to assign the correct tasks to the correct parties. And therefore, particularly when it comes to very large buildings that are often built very rapidly under tight controls of budgetary and other constraints, it's unfair to put it on the architect's shoulders. Of course, the architect drives this bus in terms of design and the regulatory aspect of compliance, building code, and submittals, and all of that. Yes, but the architect needs to be, in my mind, supported by experts who will relieve him of this burden of dealing with the technicalities of his design choices.
Right.
I agree.
Right.
I think that most of we provide a service. Um, it's been now at least 20-25 years that I've been doing this, but we do a peer review of architectural engineering drawings associated to the skins of buildings, and having been faculty at at it's like grading tests, grading exams. Um, there's some outfits like Israel spoke about Caesar Pelli's office, and Caesar Pelli not only would produce a set of drawings, they would produce a set of drawings, but they would produce books of details, which all the information was in these books of details that were binded together, and it'd be 200-300 pages of these wonderfully book quality details that said everything, how these details had to be put together, that would accompany a project manual that would also be part of the drawings. And it was a wonderful working on projects like the Performing Arts Center, in the Adrian Arch. It was wonderful to have that level of sophistication. And then after that, the drop off is pretty enormous out there. There are a number of firms that they're more design oriented and less technically inclined, and I would say that that's the majority. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that not every firm is doing 10 or 20 or 30 high rises like Arquitectonica is doing now. So they're how much background can some of these firms have for some of these high rises? But
Right.
there are firms like that, like the Caesar Pelli's and that you could point to and say, wow, it's a real pleasure to see the level of sophistication, and so that you could really KPF some of these firms that really have an enormous amount of background in the design of high-rise buildings. Um, but when you look at the majority of firms, it's really truly unfair to expect some, at the fees that architects are making, that they come in with the level of consideration of all the details, like what Israel knows and I know and so forth. So it's the Gene McGoverns of the world that are still out there, and I get we've had the opportunity, the Carl Morrises of the world that built New York, that Israel introduced me to years and years ago. Those guys, they knew in their back pocket they had somebody that they could go to ask the difficult questions about technology, and that it was a yes or a no, a right and a wrong, not shades of gray, and
Yeah.
that and when dealing with architects and engineers as well that don't know much of this, there's because they don't know all of it, it's a shade of gray as to what's the best answer, or what's the more novice answer.
Yeah.
And I think that
Right.
we've come
It's
there is an answer. There's the right answer, and pretty much all the rest of them are wrong.
yeah. It's not just the technology and the science, it's also the execution.
Yeah,
The architect cannot be held accountable, even though the architect sign off on the building at the end. We assist the architect in validating not only the choices in the engineering, but also the performance of the various parties that execute it: suppliers, vendors, contractors, um, etc. The regulatory elements of Department of Buildings is not fit for this purpose. And it's not an accusation, it's the reality. There are too many buildings being built all at once in big cities, and no municipality or state can gear up to create a bureaucracy that will regulate it. Neither do we want them to. So it has to fall on someone's shoulders. It's not one entity, it's a team. We work as a team. And so what I'm saying basically is the execution is very important, very nuanced, and it's not to be the burden of the architect.
Right.
Yes, at the end, the architects sign off, but they rely on a team. We are part of the team. There are many others: mechanical, structural, vertical transportation, and on and on and on. There are many, many, many. So, in our role, we team up with the architect. We know the design, we know the intent, we know the code compliant elements of it. And if we see a deviation or a bust, as we used to call it, we need to stop the parade. And uh, the architects are not to be expected, in my view at least, to be on the ground on every matter, on every detail, on every issue. They need to be informed of deviations that need their input and judgment, because ultimately they are the building permit holders. They are the boss. We need to help them.
Right. Right.
I would
And
just I would just sort of qualify that a little bit because I think that there's a so Israel. I think that there's especially in Florida there's certain laws that have come into effect that there is a pseudo type group of advocates that roll around as consultants and for the most part act as mouthpieces for certain associations and firms, legal firms that find cause of action against the entire industry of construction, and that it should be said that a it's not necessarily to their benefit when you prescribe responsibility to the owner or the association itself in keeping up a building that may in fact be stucco clad, where the cladding is stucco, for example, and that the building hasn't been washed, for 10 years, and the maintenance hasn't been kept up of all the sliding doors and all the rest of it. And all of the responsibilities prescribed to the architect slash engineer, contractor slash subcontractors, manufacturers, uh, and so I would say that the architect has responsibility in so much that when they have to give the difficult no, or the disposition that is not necessarily the most well liked, they have an obligation as much as everybody else to speak their mind. But also from the standpoint of the developer and slash association that takes over, they have they have that responsibility to turn over a project that can in fact be maintained, and it should be regularly maintained. And that's something that oftentimes there's a lot of finger pointing because it's not, it's something that there's a potential windfall from an insurance claim associated to deficiencies and a lack of performance, or alleged lack of performance.
Yeah.
That is in the past, the early builders of significant buildings, the Twin Towers or the Empire State Building, or our the Woolworth, people would get plaques put on the wall. Architects would get plaques put on the wall as to these buildings. I am paid, that kind of thing. Now, it's almost like a shooting gallery after a project is completed. So you're almost stood up against the wall for oftentimes innocuous reasons that are brought up by so-called glazing advocates. I would call those people that glazing advocates versus glazing consultants. They
right.
go, and I think that it should be said that in the big picture, where there is a genuine collegiality, I for the most part agree with you completely, Israel, but I think the world has become jaded somewhat in that these masterful buildings that are 60, 70 stories that are built in short periods of time, that they become targets, generally targets. At least it's been my experience over the course of the last 20 years. 25.
And you bring up a really good point, John, and as I pose to the two of you this next question, I invite the audience, if for Q&A now, if you have any questions you'd love to ask, you could hit the little raised hand icon, and we can promote you to ask the question. But what I wanted to pose to you to now is, and John, you made a good point with, a savvy developer would know to reach out to um, a consulting firm. What, especially with cities like New York and Miami, that you see new high rises come up and it's like it's exponentially getting more and more full of high rises and tall buildings. What are the conversations that should be had in order to, bring consulting firms in curtain wall and waterproofing and glazing consulting firms to the forefront of these conversations of all these new buildings going up? What should be the first to be discussed, in terms of developers and architecture firms to bring in that almost a triage, right? Because at this point, it is almost a triage where you're brought in to really optimize both the interests of the developer firm, but also optimize what the architecture firm is doing.
Let me just jump in here. I think that the lenders hold the key. So if you're a bank who's being asked to write a construction loan check of $250 million, and you're not sophisticated and skillful enough to understand the risk that this loan represents to your balance sheet, you're in big trouble. The
Right.
lenders need to do the diligence as they commit to fund construction. Funding construction is a complicated process. It's not one check. It's progressive, and it is contingent upon many things. And lenders, I don't have much contact with them, but on the occasions that I did, unfortunately, I did not see enough knowledge, interest, diligence in their approach. I wish I did, but I personally have not seen it. I haven't seen too many. I didn't get much involved with the lenders' involvement, but on the occasions that I did, I was actually pretty taken aback by how little they knew about the risk they placed their assets or the capital in. They
Right.
just gave it to a developer and said, "Have a good day, and this is the schedule of payment," because they don't formally have an obligation to confirm the validity of all of that. But the buck has to stop where the money is. And lenders, I don't know too many of them. I don't get into banking mindsets. It's not my mindset, not my history, etc. But if I would hope that lenders do a good job. And it gets a little more complicated because the way the banking industry is, as I understand it, the act of building a tall building has generally two phases. One is the construction, and the other one is the long term mortgage. So the lender who lend the construction loans have the obligation, and the lenders who provide permanent financing have a different but equally important obligation to verify that the building is good for the benefit of the bank and the depositors and the regulators.
Right. John, what are your thoughts on that?
So there have been a, as you were talking about that, I think there have been a few banks that have wanted, when the drawings have been produced, they've wanted a independent review of the envelope, and in order to sort of qualify the loan, which was sort of unique when it came up. And I think that's not the norm. That's kind of the the atypical. No, it's happened 2 or 3 times where it's been large loans, and the bank has wanted to have a surety that generally the project is a viable project from the standpoint of the skin. I would tell you that the skin probably is the most it's the skin of a tall building is the thing that that most everybody sees as the largest aspect of any project. The four elevations that are visible of a tall building. I think that Israel, mentioned, or actually said 250 million is a small project. $1 billion, $2 billion is the kind of projects that have been going up in South Florida lately. And I think that generally when that loan is made, these the it's the people that are servicing these loans, they don't really care because they've lent out that money to these builders, these developers. I think that the insurance companies take an enormous hit usually after the projects are done. There are these insurance programs that are responsible for the performance of the work, that kind of interlaces the accountability of the developer, the contractor, and certain trades. And so there's an enormous amount of after the fact vetting of the work that was performed. I think that in the process, the only safeguard that the public really has right now, at least in Florida, is the how savvy and how intent the developer is to keep an eye on the work that's being installed. I think that there's different types of folks that do what Israel has done for a lifetime, and me, which is the threshold inspections, and we're very careful at that. But we understand that we have a greater obligation to society. I would say that not everyone is like Israel and I in regards to that subject. That there are those that are almost chosen because they're not so keen on what the final product is going to be. I hate to be a little bit cynical about it, but I've seen it in my world where someone is selected. I remember years ago, we went after a project, and little did we know that there was an aspect of the mob from New York involved in the project, and my partner asked the question to one of the people that was reviewing the proposal of our services, and they went into discussion as to what the fees were, and my partner asked the man's name, and he says, "Look at this guy. He's asking me for my last name. Who does this guy think he is?" Right? And he says, so my partner was almost in shock, and he says, that the guy then said, "I don't like smart consultants. I don't like smart consultants." Years later, that project in South Florida, I'm not going to mention any names, a lot of people went to jail. There were a lot of thugs involved. The mob was involved. It was a horrible situation. We didn't touch that project. We kind of realized that there are certain people that kind of come into town, and their intentions are not the intentions of Israel's and mine, which is leave a legacy, be proud, make America great, kind of things. It's they have their intention is to make a fast buck and get out. And I don't have time for that really. I don't think Israel has time for that either. But I take a great deal of pride in saying, Made in America is the best high rise in the world. We started this process of tall buildings. If anybody knows it better in the world, it's us. Now, people may have learned a lot from us, but in this country, and it's kind of going back to where Israel started, is that it's in this country where the first high rises sort of evolved, and the knowledge is here. So we have to do a better job at protecting the public, from unscrupulous guys that are out there. I agree. Some of the laws are not necessarily to do that. There's some folks that benefit from advocating stuff that's not real. But I think that where Israel and I think really have a lot in common is what is truth, what is honest understanding of these systems that we so much we've dealt a lifetime with, and we respect the culture in which all of this was sort of developed, and bringing it out to the younger generations. I'm totally in on that, making sure that the next generation could do maybe better than we have, and how to make it better.
Very true.
Question is, the people listening, the audience, I don't know how to.
Israel, you there?
Israel?
Cool. Was I cut off?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I declined the call. Is there a Q&A part of this? I wasn't sure whether it will come
No,
later.
usually towards the end, I just invite the audience to, I would visually see it if they have their hand raised. Right now, we don't have anybody, so really, it's just we're at this point we're just kind of closing out the episode.
We either shock them or put them to sleep. Which is it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope not. I think you're always very, very conversational with me. I enjoy the conversation. So you didn't put me to sleep, Izzy.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to be on this episode. I mean, I thought it was very interesting to kind of go through the history of curtain walls and glass technology, and how much of a pioneer were these testing labs that really correct me if I'm wrong, but if they were really started here mainly in the U.S. in terms of proper testing labs, and
Definitely. Definitely.
yeah, and to see that's played a pivotal role in how we've seen the evolution of buildings really take off. So thank you both for this great time discussing this, and for the audience, we'll see you next month with our fourth episode of Behind the Curtain Wall. Thank you both so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Dan.
you.
Thank you, Israel. It's great talking to you a little bit.
Same
Yes, thank you
here.
so much, Israel.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.